It's really interesting how growing up, the culture we were in seemed like completely static and codified, even though at the time when we were growing up, uh, it was and still is changing incredibly rapidly. But it's not part of in this culture. It's not something that's often acknowledged, how the culture changes. In fact, if anything, there's a lot of pushback against that, because I think we live in a culture of righteousness, and something that is the way it should be is not going to change. It would be bad if something that is already the way that it should be changed. But no, culture is still changing, even though in terms of socially accepted presentation and just general cultural energies, it's not good form to point that out much. It's better to act like everything's figured out. And we wonder what kinds of changes will happen in the future. What kinds of big shifts in the cultures that we grew up in are going to happen in the next 2, 10, 20, 100 years. What shifts will we see in the lifetime of this body? There's a lot of things that we would like to see. We'd like to see a culture that is more inclusive of and attentive to and holds more space for the feelings and general existence of non-humans. That's the main one for us. And there's a lot of other just little, a lot of other things, just ways that we see the world differently, the ways that we feel about things that are different from how the general culture feels about them and sees them. So, of course, it's complete arrogance to suggest that things will or must be that way in these cultures, that they must change to be exactly that way, because essentially we're just hoping that the changes that we hope for are just based on how our own perception, how our own internal culture views and feels about things. We think that there's a lot of good in those things. We think that, there's a lot of good that we can see from such a cultural shift, but inherently there are many blind spots as well. And it would be a thing of sheer crazy luck if, such cultural shifts did come about and there were no unforeseen bad side effects. So, you know, as much as we and a lot of humans might fantasize or hope or practice influencing culture in drastic ways on large scales. You know, culture is something that has to, and that it is good to work itself out over time through all participants, even including all of everyone's neuroses and blind spots and distortions. We do think that there is this perception and this sort of convention. It's less of a if it is a perception, it is one brought on by insecurity within this culture of, you know, it being a done deal and the major elements being perfectly right and as they should be, and, you know, any problems is like an aberration that's somebody else's fault and needs to be fixed through politics or something. And that there's nothing wrong with nothing harmful or unjust about the culture itself. You know, not about your culture, maybe about others' cultures, but not about the one that you subscribe to. And so that idea that this culture must not change because everything must be right already, it becomes somewhat of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because in those cultures, storage ran out. In those cultures, there's necessarily not a space being held for vulnerable sharing of concerns about where the culture is maybe missing the mark. And because of that, you know, blind spots aren't sort of filled out by different perspectives, and the heart of the culture is not questioned. The shape of the culture is not questioned. Storage ran out again. You get the idea. There isn't a space for critique of the culture, so the culture stagnates. And it really does appear to not change. It still does change, but in subtle enough ways that you can brush them off or just not look in their direction and, you know, be blissfully unaware or whatever. So, yeah. Cultures need to change. No culture, nothing is really righteous in an ultimate sense, at least. and cultures need to adapt and change, and they unavoidably do change as time goes on. And we're real curious what sorts of changes are going to happen down the line. It's an interesting thing to imagine and to talk about. Yeah.